All right, so looking at industrial trends since 1970. And so, in short, the trend has been that in 1970, most of the manufacturing, most of the industrial output was done in developed countries. So about half of world industry in 1970 came from Europe, and about a third came from North America. So that is most of the world's industrial output coming from developed countries. And then today, these two regions constitute about 1/4 of the world's industrial output each. And so where are these factories going? Well, you guessed it, they are going to developing countries. And so the share of the world industry in developing countries went from about 1/6 in 1970 to half in 2010. And so this is a trend where manufacturing has gone from developed countries to developing countries. All right, so transnational corporations want to make more money. There's a surprise, right? So one of the ways that they make more money is they have turned to a new international division of labor. So these are low-paid, low-skilled jobs that are moved to developing countries. You've heard of this before, but there are some major businesses, like in the United States, who realize that they can pay people a lot less money to do the same job in China or in Mexico. So they will move the manufacturing part of their job overseas because they don't have unions, and because they can get away with paying the employees very little compared to what they would pay people in the United States to do the same job, because in the US we have minimum wage laws. All right, so outsourcing, this is when transnational corporations allocate production to low-wage countries. This turns over most of the responsibility for production to independent suppliers. More recently, this has been kind of a controversial issue because we are taking jobs away from people in the United States and giving them to people in other countries. There are obviously two sides to every issue. On the business end, there's a lot more money to be made if you outsource your jobs to China or to India or to Mexico. But on the other end, we are giving up jobs that could be here in the United States. Okay, so this recent trend of outsourcing jobs contrasts with vertical integration, which was the previous model of business. And in the previous model of business under vertical integration, industries controlled all aspects of production. So like 60 years ago, car makers, for instance, would make and put together all of their parts in one facility. And now, because manufacturing is done oftentimes in another country, this is not the case anymore. So car makers today do not typically put together all of their parts, make all of their parts, and then the whole production process is in one plant in one place. So outsourcing has gotten rid of, in many cases, vertical integration. All right. So looking specifically at Mexico and NAFTA, NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. This simply makes it, this reduces trade restrictions between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And so this went into effect in 1994. And like I said, this just eliminated barriers to moving products between Mexico, Canada, and the US. So Mexico is the lowest wage country that is near the United States, but it is still close to the United States. So it has kind of two benefits here. One is that you can pay their workers very little, but two, it's also close to the United States. And we've talked about how when shipping products, companies want to be close to markets because that means that shipping costs are lower. And so U.S. companies have started these maquiladoras, maybe that's how you say that, I'm really not sure exactly how that is pronounced, but these are plants in Mexico that are set up just over the border so that we, or United States corporations, can pay workers very little, but it's still very close to the United States. So these are just over the border. So the way this works, under US and Mexican laws, companies will even get tax breaks if they ship the materials from the US to Mexico, and then they're assembled in the maquiladora plant, and then they are exported back to the United States as finished products. All right, so the BRIC countries. These have been called the BRIC countries because this is Brazil, Russia, India, and China. That creates the acronym BRIC. And so what economists project is that the BRIC countries will make up most of the world's future growth in manufacturing. Today, they currently control about a fourth of the world's landmass, so a significant chunk of the world's geographic area. And they also contain a significant portion of the population. 3 billion of the world's 7 billion people live in one of these 4 countries. And so this makes up a lot of population, a lot of land mass. And if they worked together, they could single-handedly control manufacturing in the world. But because there's a lot of animosity between these countries, they have not been able to dominate entirely like they could if they were to work together. All right, so looking at some industrial changes in developed countries. So in developed countries, industry is shifting away from traditional industrial areas like Northwestern Europe and the Northeastern US. And we'll look specifically first at the United States. So in the US, this shift has taken place from the northeastern part of the country to the south and the west. The reason why is because of right-to-work laws. So in many of the southern states and many of the western states, they have these things called right-to-work laws. And basically, this makes it difficult for employees to unionize. So a union is where workers come together and they can bargain with their employers. There are some industries like the postal office, they have to join the union. So if you take a job as a postal worker, you have to join the union, you have to attend the meetings, you have to pay your dues. And then the point of the union is to bargain with their employer for better working conditions and more or higher wages. But because in southern and western states, they're not like union heavy, right to work laws actually make it difficult for unions to organize factory workers or bargain with employers, so they can get away with paying their employees less in these states. So that is why this shift has taken place in the United States. So looking at interregional shifts in Europe, so industry and manufacturing has shifted from Northwest Europe to Southern and Eastern Europe. One of the main reasons is simply because of the fall of the Soviet Union. So once the Soviet Union fell in the 90s, these nations switched from communist forms of government to free market governments. And so kind of the same thing, companies were able to pay employees less in Southern and Eastern Europe, and people in Southern and Eastern Europe were just happy to work in a factory like this because it was better than what they had before. And so this was stimulated, again, by cheap labor. These workers offer manufacturers good value for less money because they are less skilled workers than those in Western Europe. But they're also more skilled than workers in Asia and Latin America. So it's kind of like a happy medium there. And then the other reason why industry has shifted is because it's still close to the people who are buying these products. So the wealthy markets of Western Europe are close to where they've moved their manufacturing facilities to in Southern and Eastern Europe. All right. So skilled labor has some advantages over cheaper and less skilled labor. There's actually been a shift in production, even in developed countries. And so the old approach is called the Fordist approach. And this is like, think back to Henry Ford's assembly line. So Henry Ford claimed that he could take anyone off the street and train them in a few minutes to work a job in his factory, because basically in assembly line type work, you were doing the same thing all day long. So if you work in Ford's factory, you are putting steering wheels on all day long, or you are putting tires on all day long. And it is really monotonous and boring, but you don't have to have any skills to do that. And you can work really quickly because you get super fast at doing the same thing over and over and over again. But more recently, this has shifted to lean production. And so this is called post-Fordist production, where industries now allow their workers a whole lot more autonomy or freedom in the production process. And so now they work in teams. So the workers are put in teams, and then they're basically told to figure out the best way to perform a task. And so this is giving workers a considerable amount of freedom, and also it makes them feel like they have buy-in because they are able to contribute to the production process and offer ideas. So the team is basically given the task of coming up with the best way to figure out how to solve a problem or how to get a job done. They also are allowed to problem solve on their own. So rather than having to go to a manager or something like that, they problem solve within their team. And so they get together, they talk about the best way to solve a problem, and they consult any party that is involved in the problem. They come up with a consensus, and then they move forward. Also, leveling is a part of lean production. And so under lean, there's less hierarchy, meaning there are less like managers and co-managers and steps, up the hierarchy. And there's also no special treatment for people who have been there longer. They wear the same color uniform, they eat in the same place, they have the same parking lot, and basically everyone is perceived as an equal team member. And then in terms of productivity, new machinery and better processes, often which have been determined by the workers, have made factories a whole lot more productive. So what happens is a lot of times this actually does require skilled operators who have college degrees and not necessarily like a massive unskilled workforce. And so a lot of times we don't have, a ton of manufacturing jobs in the United States. We're primarily tertiary sector where people are providing, either selling goods or providing services. But the people who do work in manufacturing are more skilled than you would find in like a factory in India or China. All right, so recycling and remanufacturing. Recycling has become a trend in the United States. In 1970, we recycled about 7% of all solid waste, and in 2013, we recycled about 34% of all solid waste. And so the percentage of materials recycled has gone up considerably. This is the separation, collection, processing, marketing, and reuse of unwanted materials. And so there are all sorts of curbside programs and drop-off centers and buyback centers and deposit programs that will allow people to recycle their waste. And then remanufacturing is when you take recycled materials and you remanufacture them into new products. Paper mills do this, steel mills do this, plastic converters do this. And so you can take basic household items like newspapers or paper towels or plastic or soft drink containers or whatever, and they can be remanufactured into other products. And here's a picture of cars that will be transformed into steel or recycled steel that can be remanufactured and used in new cars. All right, that's all. You guys have a great day, and don't forget to send me a picture of your notes.